and you look at her, and everything about her looks white. Her father was a fair-skinned Acklands man.
Yep.
Married a white British woman. But when you're in their presence and when you're in minister's presence, everything about her, whether she's quoting Bob Marley, Marcus Garvey, her father, Sir Milo, Sir Lyndon, it's all about this black movement and Bahamianization, because her dad has instilled in her, he was actually the author of Bahamianization.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this podcast. This is now episode 3 of season 2, and we hope you guys have been enjoying these podcasts. I just want to thank you guys for the wonderful feedback so many of you have shared with me with the episode with Tim Smith and Ethan Moss. Just the inspiration that you either took from Tim Smith or the humility you got from Ethan Moss. You know, this gives us such pleasure. Loretta, welcome to episode 3.
I can't believe that we have actually completed so many episodes, frankly, and it's so exciting. And, you know, me being an early riser, to have persons who actually get up early and send me WhatsApps to congratulate us on the work we're doing with the podcast, it is so encouraging. And so, yes, I'm very delighted to be here. And talking about the last time that we were here, we were nominees for the Elevation Awards. And obviously, I don't want to congratulate us. I want to congratulate the team that produces this podcast, because we actually won the Elevation Awards.
Congratulations. So we want to give a shout out. The clap in the background is Scott's House Media. These guys are the brainchild behind this project. I have to give a special shout out to Mrs. Davriel Gardner, who worked with me initially at KO Bahamas, was really in charge of basically all of my PR, and has said to me, listen, you have such a story to tell. And honestly, it was probably the backbone of how this podcast and so many of my social media initiatives got going. So I just want to say, hats off to these guys.
They are amazing. We have, and this is a part of legacy. This is a part of uplifting what is Bahamian.
Absolutely.
I think we have the best talent resident right here in the Bahamas. And if it were not for them, we would not have won the Elevation Award. So congratulations and kudos to them.
And before we get taken away and get into our guests, I really just want to thank our sponsors as well. Of course, the Echo Art Gallery here at Bahama. We thank you guys so much for continuing to give us this wonderful venue. This is just such a great place to record this and to spend some time, because often we get here a little early. And then, of course, the Butler Legacy Foundation that continues to financially commit to make this podcast a reality. We just want to thank all those at the Butler Legacy Foundation for making this a great podcast. And so, Laurie, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of get us going.
Well, you know, I want to tell you that whenever we're in this space, our creative juices, our energy levels, everything is heightened. So I must admit that this is probably the greatest place to actually be doing this podcast. But today, you know, I just want to reflect a little bit, Franklin, on the reason for this podcast and how it originated as well. Obviously, we talked about the legacy of Sir Milo Butler. We talked about his activism. We talked about all of his business attributes. But I think most importantly, people knew him for his political ventures and, you know, his life in politics.
Yep.
And so today, I attribute a lot of what I've done personally to the lessons that we learned over the years, not just from Sir Milo, but from our grandmother and from our parents and, you know, just the generations of butlers ahead of us. So today we have the most amazing person that we're going to be interviewing, who in their own right, I think, has started to build upon the family legacy.
Absolutely.
Not only in the legal profession, but also in the political arena. And of course, none other than our most illustrious Minister of Education, whose father, interestingly enough, was always, you know, Loftus Roker told us in our very, very first podcast.
An ally of Sir Milo.
Absolutely, that whenever Sir Milo was thrown out of the House of Assembly,
sure
Glenys Hanna was right behind it. So we are so excited and happy to have the daughter of our former Deputy Prime Minister, most amazing Minister of Finance that I think obviously, that the Bahamas has ever had. A man with longevity in politics, and his daughter now following in his very, very footsteps of being the longest-serving female parliamentarian in the Bahamas. And I do stand to be corrected, but I also want to say in the Caribbean at this point, because I think she's already had 5 consecutive terms being elected. And not only that, it's been when her party has been in office and out of office. So her legacy in and of itself is amazing. I want you to join me, Franklin, in welcoming the most outstanding Minister of Education, the Honorable Glenys Hanna-Martin.
Loretta,
welcome.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And you know, when you were saying just now about Butler and Hanna being joined together at the hip in terms of what their political actions, and physically they were so different.
Yep.
Because your grandfather was very imposing, and my father was
very small.
Yes, more diminutive.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
boy, look here, they were giants.
That's for sure.
They were giants.
That's
but
for
thank
sure.
you. This is such a pleasure, and I want to commend you and the Butler Foundation for purposefully upholding the legacy of Milo Butler. This is very necessary, and if no one's going to do it, the family should ensure that this story is told and that it's told correctly and that it's not forgotten ever. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you very, very much. We truly appreciate that. But we also realize that the story of Milo Butler and the story of legends like Milo Butler are so intertwined with other legendary personalities. Yes. And so when we mention your father, when we mention Sir Lyndon and Sir Clement and, all of those men that fought for a purpose,
Yes.
that created the Bahamas, that we are able to be a part of and enjoy today. Their shoulders, whom we are, we're perched upon.
Absolutely.
They made a debt of sacrifice to the Bahamas, for the Bahamas, and for us to have this country today.
That's absolutely correct. Honorable Glenys.
Yes.
So, what I think we could start the conversation off with a little bit is your recollections of Sir Milo and of course, your father, Glenys Hanna, from a political perspective. I'd love to hear you talk a little about your recollections of some of the highlights that kind of stand out in your recollection.
Well, the first time I remember seeing Milo Butler there, now Sir Milo, became Sir Milo, was in the law firm of A.D. Hanna and Company. And he was a very imposing figure. And I remember his physical presence in that building. And I've never forgotten it. It's just, he had an aura about him. And even as a young child, I recognized an aura when I saw one. And he had that aura. I was trying to remember the stories about him. And this one is not firsthand. It's based on some research I did when I was researching the Black Tuesday, 1965, April. And one of the things, I was broad basing my research, and I was reading about the Cat Island women who were cited for contempt and who were imprisoned. They were poor farmer women, and their MP, which was H.G. Christie, was quieting land in Cat Island, his constituency. He did a lot of that. And they were adverse claimants, and it was claimed that they were in contempt of court, and they were imprisoned.
Wow.
And the next day, Parliament sat, and they were giving condolences to a member that had died. And the newspaper reports, they were actually seeking to ridicule him, because the media at that time, and I don't know how much has changed in some ways, was very biased. Yeah. And they were talking about him, but he disrupted the condolences. He said, as we sit in here, 3 women are in prison.
Wow.
And he said, we cannot rest. And he was the one that really elevated the issue to the Parliament. And I didn't know that until I researched it and I saw the report of that. But he was a giant of a man, and he was older than my father.
Right.
But certainly he was someone who had set the tone for the PLP and for people like my father, because he was fearless.
Yeah.
Bold, fearless, he's radical.
Absolutely.
And that is the sort of thing I remember of him. He even in the Parliament, he was fearless. He had no regard for any sort of injustice and lesser standard of human conduct when it dealt with people, and he was just driven by it. You know, you and I were speaking off camera, and
Correct.
you were talking about his mother,
Yep.
and that, you know, your grandmother, no, your great grandmother,
Our
great-grandmother.
That's right.
Yep.
And you know, I heard about her, but I started to read a little more about her, and I was just utterly amazed. She was such a progressive woman, way ahead of her time, and it just put Milo Butler in perspective for me, that he would have been imbued with that energy and spirit. And so the legacy really is quite extensive in the Butler family, and it goes back a way, you know.
Absolutely.
And it also, I mean, because even though she was talking about Granddaddy
Right.
and his imposing and fearless spirit, you know, when we look at the Glenys Hanna-Martins today, once again, like her father, you know, she's not big in stature,
Nope.
but
she can get up on the cross in the house.
she roars.
Absolutely.
You know, and when she roars,
People listen. Yep.
And so you see that this fierce nature has I don't know whether it's nurtured or whether it's nature, but she has been imbued with that as well. And that is why it's so fascinating to have a Glenys Hanna-Martin here. She spoke about our great-grandmother. And yes, we have to attribute a lot of the exposure that she gave to her young family as a
Amazing.
young widow very early on, because, you know, I'm not sure if you're aware, they had actually moved to the United States of America
That's what I was
I
telling
very
you.
very
Yep.
early in our grandfather's life. He had to be the man of the house. So they were influenced by the social movement that was going on, especially among the South.
Yes.
In America then. And when they returned to the Bahamas, they brought that spirit with them.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, when we look at that, we realize that, you know, your dad and Mr. Pindling and those, they would have gotten their wider exposure when they went off to study formally in Great Britain. And they came back,
Yes.
and there were the Marcus Garveys
Yep.
and,
That's
you know,
right,
that would
that's
have
right,
influenced
that's right.
them as well. So when they came back, you know, it was just this synergy that was created for justice for Bahamians.
But Loretta, you're imbued with it too. So you tell me if it's nature or nurture. I'll let you tell me, okay?
Well,
but you know, on the issue of Marcus Garvey, one of the things I discovered, and I did read that your great grandmother was in the United States, and that it was in the season of a Marcus Garvey, and she was very much there, which speaks of how progressive she was, and she was a woman,
Yep,
okay?
yep,
That's the other
yep.
thing. But I've learned that behind a Marcus Garvey was a Thomas Love.
Yep.
And Thomas Love was a Bahamian.
Yep.
And he really founded the ideological foundation. And so it's very interesting that your great-grandmother would have been over there as a Bahamian, and that the root of that ideology really came from the Bahamas.
Yep.
You know?
That's right. And, you know, when you look at it historically, I think the great thing about this podcast is even what Minister is sharing with us now are untold stories that people find so interesting, because Bethune-Cookman was also a mentor of our great grandmother.
I didn't know
and
that
so
myself.
they were friends.
I didn't know that.
And then, of course, you look at how education has evolved in the Bahamas, and the amount of Bahamians that would be graduates of the Bethune-Cookman, you know,
University?
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing.
So you see the interconnection and
Amazing.
the evolving history that was taking place in the south of the American southern states and coming across the Caribbean and the Bahamas in particular.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just learned something. I wasn't aware of that.
Yep.
So to take this point about women and leadership, Loretta, Glenys, both of you are almost career politicians. I mean, Loretta, I know you've had a little bit of a...
I'm done with that.
I know you're done with that.
What would you say? I'll be watching. I have my eye on this lady right here.
But both of you have spent careers in politics at a time when really, even now, we still see almost underrepresentation of women in our political environment and in our halls of
Yeah.
authority and power. Talk the audience through kind of what your stories have been like, and how has it been facing and standing up, you know, this courage that both of you have demonstrated. I almost meant to say to you, Loretta, that, you know, both of you know how to bellow out for your people, but Glenys ain't learned how to slap yet. But talk to us about...
Oh, goodness, don't go there.
Well,
Don't go there.
But talk to us about this journey.
But I think that there are some parallels, and this is why I have great admiration for Minister Hanna-Martin. The parallels is that, paradoxically and realistically, it's a male-dominated arena. And the males generally, and I think females to a great extent as well, believe that leadership is only within the perspective of males. And I think that we would have had similar journeys at different times, where we would have strived for higher positions within our organizations.
Yep.
And, you then begin to realize how the old boys club truly, hinders the upward progression, the upward mobility of women in the hierarchy of political organizations. And that for me is incredibly sad, because we talk about being a democratic country with democratic principles. But I think within the organization of party politics, you start to question that level and commitment, at least I did, I can't speak for Minister, that level of commitment to real democracy.
Interesting. Interesting.
One of the things I have to allude to is when we were doing the referendum in 2017, 16, 17.
The second one.
The second one. The Free National Movement was a little iffy on it. Not her.
Absolutely not.
She was sitting in the House Assembly, and we used to fight all the time in the House.
Yeah.
Not on that issue.
Yeah.
She
No.
was clear, she was resolute, and she was the only one really on her side. That was that. So I say that to say that when you hear us speak about this issue, there is a level of strong credibility associated with it, because there's the politics and then there's the fundamental principle. But on the, I was just remarking to a group of students, girls, yesterday, because yesterday was ICT,
Girls
and
and
ICT. Well, because you're all involved with that.
Absolutely.
In fact, I think I saw you all there. But what I was remarking to them is that of 39 members elected in Parliament, and when you consider that is the pinnacle of policy making,
Absolutely.
and how a future unfolds, really, because the policy, national policy, 7
Yep.
are women.
Yep.
7. And so you start there, and you get an idea of the barriers that are inbuilt, invisible, but when you see them when they appear,
Right.
when these barriers emerge. And so this is a continuing effort. I've been in it a long time, and I think I've established myself to some extent that, don't go there. However, despite that, that there is a residual bias of how, in terms of how women are viewed. And it's cultural, it's perpetuated over the historically. It's the patriarchy of our society that reinforces it. But I think that it's there. It is there, it's stubborn. I think women who are in Parliament and who are in the mix and we have in any place of leadership have to continue to fight against this wall that hinders the full progress. And it's institutional, like Loretta said, in political organizations. And so that is why I have advocated that we need the party's constitution amended so that it stipulates that at least a certain proportion must be women. Must be women.
A quota.
A quota.
A quota.
A quota.
And it's so interesting that when we talk about this patriarchal system within the Bahamas, I know few people like to touch on this, but the reality is we talk about being a Christian nation. It's in the preamble to our Constitution. And we sometimes use religion and the Bible, unfortunately, in such a way that we are able to influence the minds of the wider population, especially as the Old Testament is interpreted for the benefit of such things with regards to women being subservient and women should not be, I think this has hindered not just the upward mobility of women in politics, but generally all around. And so, you know, when we talk about trying to correct our Constitution, it's almost taboo.
Yeah.
You know, and
right.
and if we can't touch our national Constitution, we've got to make ways that we can actually pass laws, that we can move within the organizations that we belong to, make sure that there's greater gender equity.
Yep. And I guess the question I ask, and I want to push back a little bit on both of you, just to say, listen, but it seems as if the women are part of the challenge as well, right? Because when we think about this idea of gender equality, oftentimes even the women perceive themselves to only be subservient or to only be followers and not necessarily leaders. And so, you know, as a male, I'm not sure what role do we play. Help us figure this out, because obviously, you know, as you know, Loretta, you and I have had many conversations around, you know, what even I could do to continue to uplift, and something I try my best even in my own organization as a part of Girls in ICT to continue to uplift women. But sometimes I wonder whether women recognize their responsibility in this context, and I know you guys are clearly exceptions.
Well, you know, let me just say this, right? I think that women are as much a product of the culturalization as men are, and the perceptions, and sometimes they become self-perceptions. So that is a part of it. However, I don't think that we should rely on that as the basis of any sort of dilemma that we face. All through history, laws have changed, institutions have reformed to reflect a more humane, more democratic, more equitable in terms of gender, in terms of poverty issues, in terms across the board. And so, for example, women did not have the right to vote. You had a handful really that advocated, and it may be that some women at that time were not really concentrating, I don't know, on whether they should vote, but there was a thrust, and it was a global thrust. So I say that to say this, that while you may have women that view themselves a particular way, or view the situation a particular way, as a progressive nation state who upholds standards and of decency, standards of human relations at a high level, which the Bahamas does, we need to now continue to move to that. And so while you may have to bring people along with you,
Absolutely.
I think that's the point. To make a long story short,
Absolutely.
you bring people along with you. And if amongst those are women amongst those, and men, the church, whoever it is, some members of the church, we bring them along, but we cannot allow this story or the next story to be the distraction from the central goal, which is to achieve the objective.
Yep.
She says that so well, because, you know, when you look historically at the suffragettes, we hear about the leading ladies that were a part of that. But what we sometimes do not understand is that even when you look at the fraternal organizations or the sororities, for example, the sisterhood out to the fraternal, it was those very humble women across political divides. There was no division.
Right.
There were blacks, there were whites, there was, Bahamians in the Bahamas that saw the importance of being able to have the right to vote, the universal standard that not only brought for women, you know, when that happened, it also allowed disenfranchised men the right to vote.
Yeah.
Because there was not one man, one vote prior to that.
That's right.
It was still the company votes, and people can go from island to island on different days to go and mark X depending on how much property they own, the companies, so on and so forth. And so when you talk about bringing people along, Minister, those women, in their humbleness, had the capacity to influence.
That's right.
And when we talk about what you can do, you do a great job, Franklin. But until we also have, you heard Minister say earlier, I was the only female on the opposition side.
Yep.
But I found that the men, as she correctly said, did not advance the position.
I got you.
We need to make sure that we have more male voices as well. we need male voices. We need the voices of our boys, of our girls. We need them all to understand the importance, because basically, if everyone is not at the table, you're ignoring a
whole perspective is lost.
A whole perspective.
The whole perspective is lost. No question.
That's
about
right.
it. So listen, I want to just shift the conversation a little bit with you two, just to chat a little bit. Laurie, you are now third generation Butler, obviously at the forefront of, or have been at the forefront of politics. Glenys, you are generation 2 at the forefront of politics. What is it about this nature of, I don't know, political dynasties, if you want to put it for what it is, that caused both you two to find yourselves at the forefront, whether that's women's suffrage or politics or fighting for people? What is it about our heritage? And talk even about the burden that I think comes along. I think people only think about the privilege, but what about the burden that's come with being the daughter of, the former deputy prime minister, and Loretta, you as a granddaughter of a...
Well, since you're interviewing both of us, in this instance, I thought Minister would have jumped in first, but the reality is this: I was a very reluctant candidate, and my path was quite different from ministers, because we all come from a PLP background. That's the origins of our forebears. Our grandfather and my uncles and even my father. And so, when I actually forayed into politics, it was quite shocking. Really.
I remember.
It was shocking to the family. It was shocking to the wider community, because I was not following in the footsteps of Sir Milo and his sons. I actually was divergent, and I was on the F&M ticket. And boy, there was a lot of backlash. I don't know if you remember, that would have been...
rolling over in his grave
and all these stories. Oh my goodness, he rolled over in his grave, and he probably was ready to come back.
Absolutely.
And the argument that ensued at our homestead.
Absolutely.
And different family members who felt that they could give me a tongue lashing, but thank goodness, level-headedness prevailed, and they understood. But for me, just going into this arena was not so important as the vehicle that I took, but the fact that I actually was even going, because I was reluctant. And I'll never forget, you talk about how our stories are intertwined. The constituency I was going into was the constituency that A.D. Hanna represented for decades.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so my first foray into frontline politics, it was no longer called Annestown.
St. Margaret,
which was really the legacy of A.D. Hanna. He was displaced in 92 by a female, Sylvia Scriven, who also had deep roots in the Annestown community. But the Bahamas was evolving at that time, and there was a huge change. But my first foray was into that same constituency.
Wow. And
when I think of the likes of the Archie McPhees and the McPhee family, which were like the bedrock support of Arthur Hanna, but were also my personal friends. Oh my goodness. I never knew that politics would be so hard when I saw friends turn into enemies, and they literally railroaded me and told me how ashamed I should be of myself to be flying in the face of Sir Milo and A.D. Hanna, and to be coming to them to ask for their vote. I better get myself from around their house right now. It was amazing.
That, I was reluctant also to be frontline. But I grew up in a household where the atmosphere was so charged with politics, my mother and father. And I remember rallies in the alley. And my father's general, Smokey, and I think they died long before I could really had good sense, but I remember them. And I remember Southern Recreation Ground. I remember the singing. I remember the gatherings. I remember the Milo Butler and A.D. Hanna's office. And so I grew up totally immersed in that energy. And so I was always in politics. For me, I thought I understood the struggle. But my engagement was through my father, because I listened to his messaging. And I said, this man is a serious man, objectively. I know he's my daddy, but I said, wow, because he was philosophically very defined. And I always say he gave the same speech for 30 years because he spoke about the same things. We must build this country with our own hands, and I want to wipe every tear from every eye, and looking out for the more vulnerable of us, and that Bahamians should never go about the world as interlopers or as beggars. That we should always hold our heads high. And so I really was very engaged by his messaging. And so my engagement in politics was through him. And so I started on the ground with him when I was 14.
Wow.
And I know everybody in Kemp Road, including the Archie McPhees. I know them good.
And Uncle Ty and all of them.
I loved him now. But, they were wonderful people. I met some of the best people who were in his constituency at the time. So that's really how I got into it. Now, the front line was really, I think they were just desperate looking for someone, the PLP, and they was trying to fill a void, and they asked me to chair the women's branch, and that's what I agreed to do. They never broached running for a seat.
And what year was this, probably?
This would have been in 1998, 99. Okay. And as soon as I agreed, they started harassing me to run.
I see.
And I told them, no way. I really, honest to goodness, I was not interested in frontline. But one day I was sitting in PLP headquarters about 2 years later, and then the bug hit me. I say, something, I think I can do that, which I don't know, but that's how it happened for me. But I really grew up just immersed in the political thing, And
I want to share with you several thoughts that flashed across my mind while Minister was talking about her journey into frontline politics. I remember her very first poster. Seeing her, she had hair to hair at that point.
What color was it?
It was actually a different. It wasn't the color it is now. And I can see that beautiful picture of her up, on all the lampposts and everything in Engliston. What is so interesting, and I know she wouldn't mind me saying this, is that, she represents a very strong, what we call black belt area.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? In New Providence. Mm-hmm. And you look at her, and everything about her looks white. Her father was a fair-skinned Acklands man.
Yep.
Married a white British woman. But when you're in their presence, and when you're in Minister's presence, everything about her, whether she's quoting Bob Marley, Marcus Garvey, her father, Sir Milo, Sir Lyndon, it's all about this black movement and Bahamianization, because her dad has instilled in her, he was actually the author of Bahamianization.
Yep.
Bahamianization, that Bahamians must use their own equity, their own blood, sweat, and tears to build this nation. And so when you look at her and you look, this woman,
I'm not commenting on that, okay?
Then her fair-skinned, white-skinned self talking about this blackness. It's almost like
dichotomy.
Listen,
absolutely.
and listen, though, they got a black MP.
Oh, no, and I'm not knocking it. I'm just telling you, but that is the passion that she brings. And, even her mother, we have to talk about the women in our families that were strong, that were the backbone.
Yes.
And, you think of the Beryl Hannahs, you think of the Marguerite Pindlings, you think of the Caroline Butlers.
Yep.
They held so much together. You can see them out there frying fritters, bringing other women to the stage and making sure that they are that support mechanism. They are the ones that actually made sure, if you want to talk about getting out the vote,
that's one.
They got out the vote.
They were tough.
Yeah.
They were tough.
Yeah.
The women were tough,
They got the vote.
They got the vote out, and they were in the trenches, and they understood the struggle, and they were fearless. And, it is an honor to be in the shadow of these women. They were just incredible,
And
I'm
there were so many other women that were just as strong, that were able to influence in their community, in their neighborhood, around the Bahamas. So while the PLP did not prevail before 67, when 67 came around, there was a mechanism there that,
Yeah.
I don't think any of the oligarchs even expected.
Yeah, that's clear.
Because there was a movement. That movement was organic. It was grassroots. It was, I mean, that movement could not be held back.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right. And I think about Black Tuesday, you know, as well, you had the general strike.
Yep.
And a lot of reform came out of that. And then there was 65, which was the Black Tuesday. And that was really, the general strike was radical, okay, because everybody say we ain't working.
Yeah.
And it started with the taxi drivers at the airport, and it was a domino effect. But 65 started in the House Assembly.
Yep.
And of course, Milo Butler was, you know, he was involved, and of course, Lyndon Pindling.
Yep.
And the week before, it was activation in the House. But 65 was really a turning point, because when that mace went out the window, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds downstairs.
That's right. They were and they were gathered there by the women of the PLP.
That's right.
Yeah.
And those women were persistent, consistent. Anything happened in that House of Assembly,
They was
we
there.
didn't have mobile phones and stuff, but boy, that information was disseminated like
They get over the hill
rapidly.
quick.
You know,
I
it
can't
was
say how
really,
they did
really
it,
very
you know,
quick.
in hindsight, because I can't live without my cell phone,
Yeah,
but they did it.
yeah.
But
They did it.
I want to draw our attention to something else, because, you know, Minister has also served as our acting prime minister on several
Absolutely.
occasions.
Absolutely.
She obviously holds a very senior position within the cabinet of the Bahamas today. And while she has demonstrated her own strengths and her longevity and her persistence, I think, you know, as we look forward to next decade and the generation of younger women behind you, Minister, what do you see? You've accomplished so much. I hope that you'll be going for another round. Where do you see yourself, and how do you see your influence over the next electoral cycle in the next decade?
Well, you know, I really don't know, to be honest with you. I think that every step, and this probably sounds corny, but it's the truth, every step has been guided by God, because I have been on a couple of occasions reluctant along the way, and I've still found myself there. I don't regret that I've been there. I have had the opportunity, the honor, the privilege to be there, to be here. So I don't really know, because I'm not someone who really, like you had indicated for yourself, I didn't, you know, try to be here so I could be this and be that. So that's not been a part of my consciousness. So I can't really answer that.
You take each day at a time.
Each day at a time. The
Each
one
day.
thing I will say is that I pray, and my father always said this, that about his constituency, he would say to them, I pray will never let you down. And I pray that in my life's journey, and I'm sure I'm far from perfect, that I know, but I just hope and pray that I have a level of consistency in my public life and in my principled positioning that will allow people to see me as a reliable character in the mix. But I really don't know. I don't have any ambitions per se. I am driven solely by my, I guess you can call it the fire in my spirit and my heart and my soul for our people, for the nation, and for what I see and what I don't see and what we need to see. And, you know, these are the things that are motivating me every step of the way. So I can't, in terms of the projection, I have no idea. I'm going to keep fighting.
I like that. Franklin, I want to just circle back.
Yep.
You asked her about these family dynasties. I don't really like that description. I don't think it's
Yeah. I would you on that one.
I don't think it's something that I would revere at all. But you know what I just heard coming out? See, what Minister represents is what was implanted in our spirit, that this whole political life is not a profession.
No.
It's not a profession. It is a life of sacrifice and service for the betterment of the country. She still has those very old-fashioned values that our grandfather and her father and Sir Lyndon and those really, the reason for their being in that arena.
That's right.
Got you.
That's right.
Okay? Unfortunately, and I say this without any remorse. Unfortunately, we do not have sufficient persons in public life today that have that commitment. You see, when people say to me, "Oh, they don't get paid a lot and everything," I said, "Well, you don't go into public service. It's about service to country.
Absolutely.
It's about service to country. Before you sign up to become an elected official, you know what the pay scale is.
Absolutely.
So if you want to make a lot of money, you stay in the business where you
That's
are
right.
and you make that
That's
lot
right.
of money.
That's
Do
right.
not go into public life seeking that you're going, or thinking that you're going in there to get wealthy. So when she says she doesn't have a long-term vision plan for herself, I realize that it goes right back to what the Sir Milos, the Sir Lyndon Pinlings, the A.D. Hannahs, and other men and women of that era, they went in for the service to their people.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's correct, and that's where I am. So we have to see. But I think that when you made the point about the money, how much you get paid, and all of that. Politics is one of the few areas. It's really a place and space of public trust, because, and I thought about this a couple of elections ago. People line up in the sun for hours. They go into the booth. They do a simple thing. They mark an X, put the thumb in, mark the X with the pencil, and to the candidate of choice. They're choosing a government. It looks like a very simple process. I mean, X.
Yeah.
But they're doing something very fundamental and very profound. When you have the fortune of being someone who is the recipient of that confidence after the results are counted, you cannot take it lightly. You cannot, because this is actual trust of a multitude of individuals from a respective community who have placed their trust in you or in someone else. And so it's something we have to keep reminding ourselves, because particularly if you become a minister, it's a bit lofty and you get driver and all this different thing, and it becomes, that you have to
get carried away.
Caught up.
You can get carried away in the office.
Yes. Thanks for cutting that short for me. So we have to be reminded that this is the one place where you are a servant.
Yeah.
That is what you are. No matter what title you hold, you're a servant. And this is the nature of the undertaking, and you have to be reminded. And I'm not perfect. Sometimes I lose my patience with people and all of that, but I always try to come right back and catch myself fast. Because even sometimes the burdens are very overwhelming.
Absolutely.
There's so many issues, and you say, "Oh God, help!"
Yeah.
But you have to pace yourself. You have to bolster yourself, and keep moving. And so. Public life is life of service.
Yep. Loretta, I'm just reflecting on the purpose of this podcast. To hear these stories of understanding that, listen, Glenys, yourself, you ain't doing it for the money, but to remind all of our guests and all those who listen to this of the causes that we are fighting for when we talk about Bahamianization, etc. People lose that. I think there are young people there who feel, listen, I won't be in the politics because I could be on the front page of the newspaper, or I could...
I could
get
have
rich.
a driver.
I could have a driver.
Yeah.
Be chauffeured.
But it's ultimately these causes that really, as we think about multi-generational families in politics, we get to really get to the essence of why in 3 generations we're still here. So, Honorable Minister, just one final question that I have as we think about, your life in politics. Talk us through the legacy of A.D. Hannah and how you think you represent that today. And if he was here today, what assessment would he give of our Bahamas based on the things that he fought for?
Don't take me there, please.
Okay.
Don't do that.
And she was very, very close to her dad, let me tell you.
Yeah, I idolized my father. He was my father, and so that's a natural connection. But in the realm of politics, I absolutely idolized him. And I can't say it any other way.
Yeah.
I totally endorsed his vision. I watched his consistency, his commitment, his sacrifice. And, even in his 90s, the same principled positioning that he had. And so for him, that he was my role model in politics. He was my idol in politics, because we're talking about politics now, right? And so, but I will say though, I'm nowhere near what his impact has been, what he has brought to the table. Even in his political representation of his constituency, he was just amazing, and he understood it so well. So I will say that I'm an imperfect disciple of A.D. Hanna, and at this point now, I don't think I could rescue much more and I guess I could be better, but I think this is probably as good as it gets. So I have to now surrender that to him. It's in my books. I just think he was just an outstanding patriot in this country.
Let me give you my interpretation. Minister is always so modest.
Absolutely.
And I consider her friend. We have been on opposite divides, but we, I got to tell you, we literally grew up in the same pod. Obviously, she has deep roots in the pond. I don't know if she ever told you that.
St. Matthews.
Deep roots with the Hanna family in the pond, with St. Matthews and everything. And obviously, all that her father gave to her, that she learned, whether it was in law, whether it was in politics, I saw her pay back in so many ways. With the way she personally catered to him right to the end. Yeah. And I think that truly speaks to her admiration of what he had done. And she is every bit as impactful as he was, maybe in a different generation, in a different way. But when I speak with people who I know extremely well in Engliston, even, let me tell you a story. Even when I had the lady that was my nanny as a child, who lived in the heart of Engliston,
right?
Die-hard PLP woman, die-hard. There was no way she would ever consider voting F&M. But when I was running, she took my poster and put right in her living room. So when Minister Glenys Hanna-Martin would have visited her to get her to vote or, to continue, the first thing she would have seen is this F&M poster in this PLP household. Yeah. And of course, Shirley had to tell her, now, listen, don't worry about that. That's Lori. That's my girl. Exactly. That's my girl. But I vote for you. So, but the love and the admiration that the people of Engliston demonstrate toward Minister Hanna-Martin is the same love and fierceness that I received the wrath from when I went into Camp Road. Those people would have gone to war for A.D. Hanna.
Absolutely.
And the people that I know in Engliston would go to war for Minister Hanna-Martin. So her modesty, let her not brush your questions aside. History, we cannot portray what history would say about her today.
Right.
But years from now, we will see history has been very fair and kind to what she has done.
I believe so.
I appreciate that. I know no comment.
But there is no need for comment. You cannot comment.
So what do you think of those kind of, if I could sum up, those three things that you really pride yourself on, that you think, you talked a lot about how you honor your dad, and his legacy. But what are those 3-4 nuggets that you think you carry in your heart every day that A.D. Hanna really crystallized for you?
One is that the Bahamas is a great nation. And I will be the harshest critic of some of the things I see happening around me. I'm so disappointed in some things. I'm so proud of some things. But fundamentally, we're a great country. And so that's one of the things.
Amen.
The second thing is that he always used to say, we are not here for the rich and the powerful. They can take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
It is the understanding that the most vulnerable, that we're as strong as our weakest link, wipe every tear from every eye. That always understanding that policy must empower our people and bring them up. And we should never become comfortable with things as they are, particularly if we see, like, they say the poor will always be with us, and that might be so. But certainly I wouldn't be one to accept any policy initiative that could change that, or that would accept that this status quo. And the third thing is, and let me just say that about the Bahamas being a great country, that relates to our sovereignty,
Yep.
and that relates to how we see ourselves. And I think the third thing is service.
Yep.
You have to understand that the people who elected you are the people who empowered you. You ain't empowering them.
Yes, yeah.
They empower you. Now, the question is, how are you going to use this empowerment to empower them? But it's how you understand what comes first, the chicken or the egg.
Right.
And you have to understand the process. And I think that is the one thing that service, that this is why you are here. And these are your people, and this you're obliged. This is your obligation. So I would say those three things: the status of our nation, the weakest amongst us, and the fact that we are in public life for service. I think those are the three things.
Incredible.
And as we round out, Franklin, I want to also just as we talk about generations of success and generations of following in the footsteps of our parents, I know, interestingly enough, that when I look at my two children, one's gone into medicine, one's into sport, and I know that they see the sacrifice, they see the hurt, they see the dark side of being in public life and how you can be treated or mistreated.
Mistreated, yeah.
And so as we look forward, before we close out this very powerful episode with Minister, I want to confess that my kids are probably so far away from the political limelight and wanting to even be a part of that politics.
Absolutely.
Because they hurt for us.
Absolutely, no question about it.
They feel our pain. And I just wanted her to speak to the next generation of her children, because I know that they're making their mark in life in different areas. And I want you to speak to that just a little bit.
That's a very important point, Loretta, about that generation, because they are, this is my view now, I think they are more intelligent than many of us ever were or are, or any preceding generations. I think they're in many ways more progressive. And I think that if you see a level, if you see them being, what's the word I want, sort of jaded about something, it's because probably for a very good reason. They're less tolerant of foolishness and of things that don't make sense, and they're right. And so I believe that the future of our country is going to be in very good hands. I'm confident that they're already, your children, my children, other children in this nation are already doing their thing. It'll be good to see some of them now emerge in the political thing. But I think that the generation that's emerging, I'm very confident that they will be more, what's the word I want? They will be more, I guess, faithful to the principles and the standards of what the expectations are. They're less willing to countenance, the things that we sort of operate.
They're intolerant.
Okay.
They're intolerant.
Yes.
I agree. They're totally intolerant. And I'm not saying that in a negative way.
Right.
But they're not going to put up with some of the
No.
things that the generation before have put up with.
No.
And, quite frankly, they don't even see the relevance of why we did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And I think that's it. But Minister, I would like to take this opportunity not just to thank you, but to commend you for the strength you've demonstrated. You have our nation's future in your portfolio, education.
Yes.
The key thing.
Yeah.
At one point, our grandfather was the Minister of Education.
Yep.
But today, you came into office this time around on the heels of a pandemic that had literally shut down the educational system, the institution. There were a lot of gaps in the learning process. And I just want to say that it was probably one of the most challenging portfolios that could have been bestowed on anyone.
For sure.
Still
anyone.
is.
And to be able to cast your net and to bring successes across the archipelago and still not only get kids back into school, get them back online, but to even be building new schools and communities where schools are. I want to commend you.
Thank you very much. And you know, this is the pandemic. We don't talk about it, but it also has affected the mental health of a lot of young people.
No question.
All of the research is showing this. We're seeing it, some things in the Bahamas, but the research globally, UNESCO has done research, United States, World Bank. Mental health has been impacted with young people, and
So with young people, with all
Oh,
us.
exactly.
It wasn't, you had people cooped up in places they hadn't been cooped up with other people for so long. It wasn't just young people, Minister. It was all us.
All us.
But you know, I think the one thing that I do bring to the table is, and it's not necessarily a skill set or anything of that nature, is that I have absolute confidence in the young people in this country and the children in this nation. And so I just know that if they're not faring the way they should, then something wrong.
Yep.
Not with them. Something is wrong with what we're doing and how it's being played out. And so I start with that premise. Let's go to the drawing board to see what are the issues. Why is this happening? Why is this not happening? And so that is the approach we've taken. I'm told it will take years. I pray not, because I'd like to see some improvements while I'm here. And hope maybe we will, I don't know, but they say usually in education it takes years to really yield the results. But we're working hard to see some early results, and we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I think you're doing a great job. I
you so
often
much.
feel badly if, I don't like intruding on people's personal time and everything, but, people seem to think that ministers and prime ministers, they just have the cure-all for everything.
Everything, yeah.
Let me talk to my minister. Let me talk to my MP. And so when people reach out to me and ask me, you think you could talk to Minister Glenys Hanna-Martin for me, please?
Anytime.
I almost feel like, oh my goodness, this woman's got
Yeah,
so
so many
much
other
on
things.
her
No,
plate,
no, no,
you
no.
know?
Yeah.
And
No.
I'm here reaching out to her, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to just be another
no,
problem.
no.
You
No,
know,
no,
but
not at
we
all.
want to really, really thank you so very much. Franklin, I think that when I look at the resilience of our people, and you look at the longevity of Minister Hanna-Martin, I'm so delighted that we were able to finally get her on the
Absolutely.
Butler Legacy.
It's been a long time coming.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's been a
yes,
long time. But the stories of our generation and the previous generation, the way that our forebears worked so hard together to bring us to where we are today. I just want to say thank you very much on
Thank
behalf
you
of
so
the
much.
Butler Foundation,
Thank
Minister,
you.
for taking
And
this
I'm proud
time
of
out
you too. I
to
can
be
tell
with
you
us.
right now.
Yes.
Very, very, very proud. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Continue to do what you can for the least of our brethren
Yes.
and sisters as well, Honorable Minister. It's really been a pleasure to have you for this conversation. I echo Loretta's comments. It's been a long time coming, but it's great to have you. And again, what it, to me has been left is really the impact of A.D. Hanna
Yeah.
and his life around Bahamianization and understanding this is a great country. And that policy is really for the least of our brothers, not for the wealthy. And so those are the things that really stand out to me, that we have to always remember that when you're in public life, you are serving the least of our brethren.
That's right.
Not those who have. As you said, he says, and it makes sense, those who have wealth can take care of
He
themselves.
can take it himself.
Absolutely. So thank you, Minister Hanna.
Thank you so much.
Loretta.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to be
Listen
with
to
you,
me.
Franklin. And listen, I just want to take this opportunity once again to thank our sponsors.
Absolutely.
The Butler Legacy Foundation, which actually made this happen. But also, we could never thank Bahamar
And the Echo Gallery.
sufficiently for this beautiful space they always provide for us. I'm sure that it adds to the aesthetics
Absolutely.
of the audience, watching us as we produce these wonderful podcasts.
And I want you all to know, you all ain't bad looking people, so you all just bring out the place.
Aw, thank you very much. We accept that. I accept that.
Hey, we received that.
Oh, thank you.
So in wrapping up to our guests, I really just want to thank you guys. We hope you found this podcast not just to be entertaining, but to be educational and informative, that you've been left with another nugget of Bahamian history. and about legacies and how they're built. And so we want to, again, just thank you. We want you to continue to follow us on YouTube, of course, Apple Podcasts, of course, Spotify, whatever your favorite medium is. And we encourage you, please share this podcast. Our hope is not just to learn the stories for ourselves, but to get young people, people who understand the history of the Bahamas, to understand that legacies are not built. They're not built unintentionally. They're built with strong foundation and values, and we want you guys to continue to do your part as we do our part.
And they're built with many hands.
Many hands.
Many hands.
Absolutely.
And we just want to say, share this, because this is our Minister of Education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you
afternoon.
very much.
Thank you.